Hello everyone, John here again, and today we're going to talk about market hog criteria and what we need to look for whenever selecting market hogs. First, let's go over three big points. First and foremost, we want our hogs to be practical, productive, and structurally correct. So let's break down practical first. Practical, in my mind, means they need to be lean in their muscle shape and genuine in their skeletal width. Productive can also be broken down into two factors. Productive means they're going to be heavyweight and have an easy feeding look. And we identify an easy feeding look by them being big in their rib or their body or their volume. Now, all three of those are synonyms. So if they're big and bold in their center portion of their skeleton, which is where their rib is located, that means they're big-bodied and big-volumed as well. Now, structure, even though we can't eat bone, I've heard that said many times, it's still very important to remember that bones are connected together, and how well they're connected means less stress or more stress on a market hog. Now, we want them to be structurally correct because that means they'll have less stress throughout their life period. A couple of things we look for whenever we identify structure is that they're correct in their angles and they're flexible in their joints. In last segment, we talked about breeding cattle and how we want a correct angle to the shoulder and pastern. That's what we mean in hogs as well. We want them to have a correct angle to their shoulder and a correct angle to their pastern. We also want them to be very flexible in their joints. Just like cattle, hogs have shoulders, hips, knees, hocks, and pasterns. And they need to be flexible in these joints. That way they have extra cushion whenever they travel, go to the feed bunk, go get a fresh water supply, whatever they need to do. But flexible joints will help them do it. Now, these are the three big points for your basic market hog credentials. Now, if you're judging show stock, you need to focus on two more things. At this point, they need to be attractive. Show animals are going to be shown in front of multiple people, typically graded by a judge, on not only these three main points, being practical, productive, and structurally correct, but they also need to have an extra look of quality, being very fresh and attractive in nature. Now, what does attractive mean? Well, they're up-headed, level design, and bold in their rib. Now, being level design and bold ribbed, we define that as balance in cattle. We do the exact same in market hogs. We also want them to have an up-headed look. We call this femininity or extra masculinity in bulls or heifers, but in hogs we typically don't reference that too much. We also want them to be fresh. We don't want an old, stale, boar or sow kind of look to our gilts and barrows. We want them to look like they have a combination of both a youthful feature, and we don't want a lot of fat on them either, because extra fat isn't very profitable. So that being said, we want to make sure that our hogs are practical, productive, structurally correct, and if they're show stock, we want them to also be attractive and fresh. So let's compare market hogs and define what I believe is probably the biggest topic that any hog judge will ever say whenever he's judging a show. So what is genuine? Well, now this is a gilt, and genuine can best be defined by having skeletal width up high and below. So even though this is a gilt, we're not using her for breeding. We're actually going to use her in a market hog class. So remember that in breeding gilts, they're going to turn into sows once they have their first litter of pigs. And we're going to expect them to have 2 litters of pigs every year until we either sell them or they pass. But even though we're not using her for breeding, she still has plenty of power, as indicated by her massive, wide, and expressive hip. This is her hip, this is her base, and then this is her top. So whenever we talk about any form of livestock, we want them to be genuine. As I said earlier, this correlates with their width up high to their width below. Look at the blue line. This is the top of their hip, and it's a straight line down all the way to her base on both sides of her skeleton. If this gilt was not genuine, notice the red lines. She would be wide up high, but her feet would V in to this point at the ground. The width at the top of the skeleton should match the width at the bottom of their skeleton. Now, really in any market class, whether you're judging goats, sheep, hogs, or cattle, the most important criteria is muscle. Muscle can be identified as both width and shape. Notice these points over here. Not only do we see a little bit of indentation here on the right side of her hip, but there's also a pretty big indentation into the seam to her ham. We see a lot of turn to her lower ham. We see a lot of turn to her ham-loin junction. Remember, this is the top, or where the loin is located. This is the ham. This is the ham-loin junction. So not only is she massive and wide and genuine in her skeletal width, but she still has plenty of shape, especially in these areas. Remember that fat does not have shape. Muscle has shape. So look for shape whenever you're trying to identify true muscle in market hogs. So from left to right, there's a heavy muscled barrow, a below average muscled gilt, and a very light muscled gilt. Remember that a barrow is a castrated boar, meaning that he is no longer intact, no longer has sexual or reproductive organs, and an intact male is a boar, meaning that he does have testicles, which are his sexually reproductive organs. So pay attention to this barrow here. We just talked about shape. If you notice this barrow's hip, he has enormous amounts of dimension through his outer hip, through the base of his ham, and the seam of his ham, and you can truly just see these lines of dimension on either side. We also know that he's genuine because he's wide up high, and he carries that into his base. To show you again, notice these blue lines. He remains wide at the top portion of his skeleton and keeps that line true all the way into his base. Now, this gilt here isn't quite as expressive or just really cut or lean or just dimensional in her muscle shape, but she is wide at her base, especially whenever you compare her to the gilt all the way to the far right. The gilt to the far right might have a little bit of width up high, but notice how she V's tremendously towards her base. That's not ideal. The barrow is the most ideal picture of the three, because not only does he have genuine width, but he also has an extreme amount of shape. The gilt in the middle, we can consider her to be maybe a little genuine, but because she doesn't have as much muscle, we don't call that true genuine just power or width. The gilt to the far right has neither muscle nor matching width, so she is the farthest from genuine. Muscle can also be determined by looking at the top of any livestock. We might not be able to notice true genuine width because that accounts for the width of the upper portions of the skeleton to the width at the base or at the ground. But we can still notice quite a bit of shape here. Once again, this is the ham, but we like to refer to it as the hip in livestock judging. Here's the loin, or the top, is what we call it in livestock judging. That bold, productive rib that we talked about earlier. And we also not only have a correctly angled blade, being almost 45 degrees at the angle, but there's also quite a bit of shape here too. If you notice this line, there's a good bit of dimension there. So remember that the major points of shape to look for are the hip-loin junction, the loin, and the blade whenever you're looking down their top. You can also see their hand shape as well from the side. So I've had a lot of people over the years tell me that, John, if I stand in behind all of these hogs, I can easily tell who the winner is. Well, kids, the hard truth is that the front view is actually the most important whenever determining muscle and true, genuine skeletal width. And we can easily see this in our young livestock. For example, this piglet over here, you see quite a bit of expression down his top, and we talk about them being wide up high. If you notice the top of his shoulders, he's super wide. He's really set apart in the shoulder blade. He maintains that through his shoulder, and then his chest floor, or the base of his chest, is also extremely wide, and he carries that line consistent all the way down into the ground. So keep in mind that in order for livestock to be genuine, they must have the following: a wide chest, a stout forearm that continues all the way down squarely into a powerful wide base. They need to be expressive in their blade, their top line, or their loin, bold in their hip or stifle, extremely wide in their base, powerful in their hip, and they need to make sure that their skeletal width up high matches their skeletal width down at the ground. This is a boar, as indicated by his sexual reproductive organs or his testicles, and he's worth quite a bit of money because he is genuine. He's set apart in his chest, he's powerful from blade to hip, and then no matter if you're looking at the front view or the rear view, he just blows you away in terms of true, genuine skeletal width. Now, if you were a little confused by any of the terms here today, please review this chart and feel free to pause your video and study any of these areas. And if you want to understand what they are whenever they're going to be harvested or in carcass form, here's another chart that you can look for. Once again, thank you so much. Study hard, and good luck at the Lakeland contest.